There comes a time in life when the noise of the world fades into the background, and what matters most is peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from temporary escapes, but the deep kind that settles into your bones when you know you're living life on your own terms. And for some people that means living alone. Now I know what you might be thinking. Living alone? At my age? Isn't that lonely? Isn't that risky? Society has a habit of making us believe that solitude is something to fear, but that's far from the truth. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Some people are surrounded by family, yet feel more isolated than ever. Others live alone and have never felt more at home within themselves. It's not about having people around. It's about having the right kind of life that brings you peace, balance, and a sense of purpose. But how do you know if living alone is truly right for you? If you're wrestling with the idea, unsure whether it's the right step, you're not alone. Many older adults face this crossroads, questioning whether they should continue living with family, in shared spaces, or finally embrace a life of independence. Today we'll explore 12 signs that might suggest it's time for you to live alone, and why doing so might just be the best decision you'll ever make. First, let's start with one of the most common but overlooked signs. You feel emotionally drained after being around people too often. There's a point in life where you realize that constant socializing, even with family, takes more from you than it gives. Maybe it's the endless conversations that don't really lead anywhere, the obligations to attend every family gathering, or the feeling that your energy is being spent on things that don't truly fulfill you. If you find yourself longing for moments of silence, craving time where you can just be without having to entertain or engage, that's a sign. And it's not selfish. It's self-awareness. Another sign is that your personal space no longer feels like your space. This happens often when older adults live with family, especially younger relatives, who may not fully understand the value of solitude. Maybe your home has turned into a place where decisions are made for you, rather than by you. Your opinions on household matters get overlooked. You start feeling like a guest in your own life, as if you're simply existing rather than truly living. If your personal space no longer feels sacred, it might be time to create a space of your own where you set the rules, the rhythm, and the atmosphere. And then there's the realization that you enjoy your own company more than most people's company. This isn't about disliking others. It's about recognizing that solitude gives you something no one else can. When you live alone, your thoughts have room to breathe. You can wake up when you want, eat what you like, listen to music or sit in silence, without having to consider anyone else's preferences. If you feel more alive, more at ease, and more yourself when you're alone, that's a sign that a quieter, more independent life may suit you better. Of course, we can't talk about living alone without addressing another crucial factor, the exhaustion that comes with constant caregiving or being the family problem solver. Many older adults find themselves in a position where they're expected to be the steady hand in everyone else's life. Whether it's looking after grandchildren, acting as a mediator in family disputes, or simply being the one who people turn to for advice, it can be overwhelming. Love is a beautiful thing, but when it comes at the expense of your own peace, it starts to feel like a burden. If you feel like you're constantly carrying the weight of other people's problems and rarely have time for yourself, stepping into a life of solitude might just be what you need to finally breathe. And speaking of breathing, let's talk about freedom, the kind that only comes when you have control over your own life. If you find yourself longing for days where you can just sit by the window, sip your coffee in peace, and let the world move without you having to participate in every little detail, that's a sign. Many older adults realize, often too late, that they've spent most of their lives catering to the needs of others. But life isn't meant to be an endless cycle of obligations. It's meant to be lived, savored, and enjoyed. If you crave a life where you can make choices based on what feels right for you, not what's expected of you, then living alone might be the right step. And here's something people don't talk about enough: the ability to create a daily routine that truly fits your needs. Maybe you prefer eating dinner at 4 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. Maybe you like reading late into the night without worrying about disturbing anyone. Maybe you enjoy taking long, quiet walks without having to answer a dozen questions about where you're going. When you live alone, every decision is yours to make, and that kind of autonomy is priceless. We've only touched on the first few signs, but already you might see yourself in some of these situations. And if you do, know this: choosing to live alone isn't about pushing people away. It's about pulling yourself closer to the life you truly want. There's nothing wrong with wanting peace. There's nothing selfish about needing space. There's a truth that many people don't talk about. Sometimes the most peaceful life is the one where you answer to no one but yourself. When you reach a certain stage in life, you begin to see things clearly. You recognize what drains you, what lifts you up, and what no longer serves you. And for some, the realization comes with a quiet but undeniable truth. It's time to live alone. We've already covered a few signs that suggest solitude might be the best choice. If being around people constantly exhausts you, if your personal space doesn't feel like yours, or if you've spent too many years taking care of everyone else, these are all clues that a life of independence might be exactly what you need. But let's go even deeper, because there are more signs, subtle but powerful, that reveal when it's time to create a home that belongs only to you. One of the biggest signs that you should live alone as an older adult is when your boundaries are no longer respected. This is something that happens too often. You set a limit, yet people cross it. You ask for space, but it's ignored. You try to reclaim your time, yet there's always someone who expects more from you. And over time, you start feeling like you exist for other people's needs rather than your own. When you live alone, your boundaries become law. You decide who enters your space, when, and for how long. You choose what level of interaction feels right for you. And that kind of control over your own life isn't just important. It's necessary for peace of mind. Another sign is when you're constantly being expected to adapt to others, but no one adapts to you. This happens a lot in shared living situations, especially with family. You may have to change your schedule to accommodate others. You might feel like you're walking on eggshells, careful not to disturb anyone. You may even find yourself hesitating before doing simple things, watching TV, playing music, cooking what you want, because you have to consider how it affects those around you. But here's the thing. Life should be a balance. And if you find yourself always adjusting for others, but never feeling like they do the same for you, that's a sign that you need a space where you set the rhythm. And then there's the matter of mental clarity. As you get older, you begin to realize how much noise there is in the world. Not just literal noise, but mental clutter, unnecessary stress, and emotional weight that isn't yours to carry. If you've been feeling mentally drained, overwhelmed by the energy of others, or simply in need of stillness, that's a powerful sign. Solitude gives your mind the space it needs to breathe. It allows you to hear your own thoughts without interference. And in that silence, you often find answers that were hidden beneath all the distractions. There's also something deeply important about living at your own pace. This might be one of the most overlooked but essential reasons for living alone. Maybe you move slower these days, and that's okay. Maybe you have a specific way of doing things, and you don't want to explain it or justify it to anyone. Maybe you don't feel like rushing, like keeping up, like following someone else's tempo. When you live alone, there is no pressure to speed up or slow down. You move in the way that feels natural to you, and that kind of freedom is something you can't put a price on. And here's something that people don't always admit. Sometimes you just outgrow the presence of certain people. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean you don't care. But as life shifts, so do relationships. You may realize that the people you once felt close to no longer align with your way of living. Maybe their energy feels too chaotic for you now. Maybe their priorities have changed. Or maybe yours have. And instead of trying to force connections that no longer fit, you might feel the urge to step away. Not out of resentment, but out of understanding that peace matters more than proximity. And let's talk about the need for simplicity. As you get older, you don't need as much as you once did. You don't need a full house, constant movement, or an overflowing calendar of obligations. Maybe all you really want is a quiet morning, a comfortable chair, and a home that feels like a sanctuary instead of a station for endless activity. If you've been craving a simpler life, a slower rhythm, and fewer distractions, that's a clear sign that solitude may be the key to your contentment. Now let's address something practical: the ability to control your own home environment. When you live with others, you often have to compromise on everything. How clean the space is, what temperature feels comfortable, even how much noise is acceptable. But when you live alone, every decision belongs to you. You set the atmosphere. You create a space that reflects your needs and preferences without having to negotiate every little detail. And that, in itself, brings a level of peace that many don't fully appreciate until they experience it. Finally, there's one last sign that often goes unnoticed. If you feel a deep, unshakable pull toward solitude, it's probably because you need it. Sometimes your intuition knows before your mind does. If you've been feeling restless, craving more time alone, or fantasizing about a life that belongs entirely to you, that's not random. That's your soul telling you what it needs. And ignoring that voice will only lead to frustration, exhaustion, and the feeling that you're not fully living the way you're meant to. If any of these resonate with you, don't ignore them. Choosing to live alone isn't about escaping people. It's about moving toward a life that truly honors who you are now. There's something liberating about reaching a point in life where you don't feel the need to explain yourself to anyone. No justifications, no apologies. Just a quiet understanding that you know what's best for you. And for many older adults, that realization leads them toward one undeniable truth. Living alone might be the best thing they ever do for themselves. Maybe you've realized that constant socializing drains you more than it energizes you. Maybe you've been longing for a space that feels truly yours, where your boundaries are respected, and your daily life is shaped entirely by your own choices. Or maybe you've simply outgrown certain dynamics and now crave a simpler, quieter way of living. But there are still a few more signs, subtle but just as powerful, that confirm why solitude might be exactly what you need. One of the biggest indicators that you should live alone is when you no longer enjoy small talk or unnecessary conversations. It's not that you don't appreciate people. It's that you value meaningful interactions over mindless chatter. You're no longer interested in gossip, in surface-level conversations, or in discussing things that don't truly matter. You'd rather spend your time in silence than force yourself into interactions that feel empty. And that's not a sign of withdrawal. It's a sign of wisdom. When you live alone, You get to choose the quality of your conversations. You engage when you truly want to, rather than out of obligation. And that makes every interaction more intentional, more fulfilling. Then, there's the need to protect your energy. As you get older, you become more aware of how certain environments, conversations, and even people affect you. Some leave you feeling light, peaceful, and understood. Others leave you feeling drained, anxious, or burdened with problems that aren't yours to carry. If you've reached a point where you feel like you're constantly protecting your energy rather than sharing it freely, that's a clear sign. Living alone allows you to create a space where your energy isn't constantly being pulled in different directions. You control who has access to you. And that, in itself, is one of the greatest acts of self-care. And then there's the simple but profound realization that you find peace in your own presence. There are people who fear being alone because they haven't made peace with themselves. But you enjoy it. You don't mind spending hours in your own company. You like the sound of silence. You don't need constant entertainment, background noise, or distractions. You've cultivated an inner world that feels just as rich as the outer one. And that's rare. It means you're at a stage where you don't need people around you to feel fulfilled. You simply choose when and how you engage. Let's not forget the importance of having complete control over your daily rhythm. Maybe you like waking up at sunrise, or maybe you prefer staying in bed until noon. Maybe you enjoy spontaneous late-night walks, or maybe you like cooking dinner at a time that makes sense only to you. Whatever your rhythm is when you live alone, it belongs only to you. You no longer have to adjust to someone else's schedule, their habits, or their preferences. You live in a way that feels natural, without compromise. Another strong sign is when you value peace over social expectations. Society often tells us that we need to be surrounded by people to be happy, that we should always be part of a household, always engaging, always socializing. But deep down, you know that happiness isn't about how many people you have around you. It's about the quality of the life you create. And if that life feels more fulfilling when you're alone, then that's all the validation you need. You don't live for appearances. You don't make decisions based on what others think. You live in a way that brings you peace, even if it looks different from what others expect. And here's something deeply personal. If your home no longer feels like a sanctuary, it's time to create one that does. Your home should be your safe place, your retreat from the world. But if you're living in a situation where you don't feel at ease, where you feel like a guest in your own space, or where there's tension, noise, or constant demands, it's time for a change. When you live alone, you have the power to create a home that reflects exactly what you need. A space that feels peaceful, that brings you comfort, that allows you to move through your days in a way that feels good to you. And finally, the most powerful sign of all, you simply feel ready. Sometimes there's no dramatic reason, no single event that pushes you toward solitude. You just know. You wake up one day and realize that you want something different. You want quiet. You want freedom. You want space. And that feeling doesn't go away. It lingers, growing stronger each day. That's when you know it's time. We've now explored nearly all the signs that point to the need for solitude. If these words have resonated with you, it's because you already feel the pull toward a life of independence. And that pull isn't something to ignore. It's guiding you toward the next chapter of your life, one where peace is the priority and your happiness is non-negotiable. Living alone as an older adult isn't about isolation. It's about intentionally crafting a life that makes sense for you. It's about waking up in a space that feels like yours, moving through your days with ease, and knowing that every choice you make belongs to you, alone. It's about having the peace to think, to breathe, to simply exist without constantly adjusting to the needs of others. Of course, making this transition requires a level of self-trust. There might be moments of doubt, wondering if solitude will feel too quiet, too empty. But here's the truth. The kind of loneliness that hurts isn't the kind that comes from being alone. It's the kind that comes from being around the wrong people, in the wrong situations, living a life that no longer fits. And if you felt that kind of loneliness, then you already know that solitude isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. If you decide that living alone is the right step, start by creating a space that truly feels like home. Make it comfortable, peaceful, and reflective of your needs. Find ways to stay engaged with the world in a way that suits you, whether it's through hobbies, occasional visits with loved ones, or simply enjoying the beauty of your own company. And most importantly, trust yourself. Trust that if you're feeling drawn toward solitude, it's because your soul knows what it needs. So if you're at that crossroads, wondering whether to take this step, ask yourself one simple question. Do I feel more at peace alone than I do with others? If the answer is yes, then maybe it's time to finally give yourself the space, the freedom, and the life you deserve. Because in the end, choosing to live alone isn't about escaping the world. It's about creating a world that feels like home.